Hi, Nektarios. How are you?
Hi, Zara. I'm all right, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Um, so we are obviously going through the Future Farm team right now and getting to know each of the team members. And really excited that you're going to be the next person or second person after Vladi to do a little deep dive with us. Um, I've got some questions. I want to jump straight into them with you, if that's okay.
Go
And
for
then
it, of
let's,
course.
yeah, let's see where we go from there. Um, so we obviously know parts of your story already that you've kind of alluded from the podcast, but uh, I'm really keen to understand, what your journey was. What was your story before Future Farm, and ultimately, what in that route kind of led you to the Future Farm?
You mean apart from wanting to be a breakdancer when I was 12?
Let's start there. Yeah.
um, the relevant bit starts about 2010 when I started working in innovation. When I was working in the corporate world in financial services for a company called Swift. And I joined by accident, more or less, not by design, this innovation team, which was quite visionary at the time, called InnoTribe. And with InnoTribe, we were looking to bring the whole concept of innovation to the wider financial services community. And part of that is finding all these startups that were doing cool things that would be relevant for the banks. Still very much from a corporate mindset, but I had this transformation experience over a couple of years where I realized that the world is actually very different than the one I saw through my corporate lens. But most importantly, I've ended up working with a lot of kind of early stage, later stage startups because my thing in InnoTribe was running the InnoTribe startup competition. It was a crazy idea that we took and we grew it to a big global process. And in that time, we just saw some amazing companies. And that led to me then leaving Swift and starting an accelerator called Startup Bootcamp Fintech. So from working with entrepreneurs in the context of a competition, I ended up working with entrepreneurs quite deeply for 5 years. So Startup Bootcamp Fintech launched in London in February 2014, and over 5 years we grew it to this huge kind of global machine with 12 locations around the world doing fintech and insurtech. And so I ended up seeing a lot of entrepreneurs, working with them, talking to them, having moments where you share the successes, but you also kind of are with them when they're having the real lows. And one of the things that I saw was that people are experiencing a lot of mental health, emotional health challenges, and usually are
Mm.
not aware of it. They don't really know what's going on. And if they do think something's going on, they don't give themselves permission to acknowledge it because you have to be strong, because you have to be tough, because part of the entrepreneurial buzz and the whole kind of image that's being portrayed from the outside world is you have to be, it's part of the game and you have to just ignore it. And then people, of course, crash and burn. So I left at the end of 2018 because I was tired myself. I was tired from an intellectual perspective because the industry wasn't really doing what I think it should have been doing. But also because I've been traveling a lot, I've had some disagreements on strategic direction of the business with my co-founders. And ultimately, I was burned out. I just didn't see it myself like this. And I left, I had my leave-in drinks on a Thursday afternoon. On a Friday morning, I wake up and I had a message from my brother saying, you better come to Greece because we don't think dad will make it. And by the time I landed in Greece, my dad had passed away. So I found myself from, hey, I'm leaving this business behind. I'm going to take some time off and have cigars by a tropical beach to being in Greece, looking after or being there for the family and dealing with very different things. So my own personal journey is very much intertwined with what I saw other entrepreneurs face.
Mm.
Um, and I gave myself about 6 months before I even started looking at what to do next. And I had lots of coffees with people, and this, you have to do something for the people who are struggling in this entrepreneurial world was always in the back of my mind, but I didn't really know what it is. I didn't have a format, a structure, a business in mind. And as I was talking to people, a couple of people said to me, you should talk to this woman called Vladi. And ironically, I had met Vladi before in her old capacity when she was working at Anthemis, but we never really had a rapport or connection. But two separate people said to me, talk to her. So we ended up having a Skype session and we ended up finishing each other's sentences. We were making the same references. And that's where we started talking about how do we bring two perspectives together. Vladi's at that point vision of building a mechanism that helps people through transitions in their lives, and me come in with a specific founder focus. And at the end of the year, by kind of December 2019, we were pretty clear that we should do this together. And Nadim was part of the initiative that Vladi had started. And this is how my journey went from corporate to entrepreneur to working with a lot of startups to actually experiencing some of the challenges myself, but also seeing a lot, to launching something that is looking to help people.
It's incredible because the evolution of that, well, you summarize it yourself there, it's so stark, right? You've seen it from almost all the different parts from the ecosystem. So then focusing on the Future Farm and kind of what it is now, what is it to you, and why does it matter for you?
It's not going to be easy to answer in a straightforward way because it's changed. Because when I started my first conversation with Vladi, it was very much about, I want to help the individuals. I want to actually help the founders sits there feeling really terrible and being scared to say it, to find a voice, to find a way to actually express it. And as we've worked through what we're doing, we realized that we can do some of it. We should be involved in some of it. But ultimately, we all come more from an ecosystem background. We all actually work in environments where we try to bring everybody to the table that's involved and responsible in this. So what Future Farm means to me is ultimately a couple of things. One is to continue doing the podcast, because we think that by sharing these stories, you just give more people an example of how somebody has experienced something and they can relate to that. So it's important to continue with raising awareness and destigmatizing mental and emotional health challenges that you go through as somebody who builds a business. Sort of linked to that is also extending the definition of entrepreneurship, because we also want to move away a little bit from that very cliche Silicon Valley driven entrepreneurial image, which is the two 20-year-old dudes, usually straight, white, young, and American, to show that entrepreneurs come from very different walks of life. Even in my startup bootcamp times, the entrepreneurs in our program are usually people in the mid-40s, because to build a business that is selling into banks for very niche problems in the financial industry, you needed to have worked in the industry. So they're very different people. Okay, so one of the things I did in my time, focused in my time at Startup Bootcamp, was actually pointing fingers and telling the banks that although they know what they need to do, they were not prepared to do it because it was too difficult. So they ended up doing the things that were easy to market and looked good in an annual report, but they weren't really trying to change. They weren't really trying to innovate because it didn't really have to.
Yeah.
So there was an element of finger pointing that was really important to me, because if you don't call out the people who are responsible for a situation and be just very candid with no commercial kind of intention, it's really just saying, look, if we're talking here about something that has to change, then everybody needs to do their piece. And when we talk about mental health for entrepreneurs, when we talk about the problems that somebody experiences who's building a business, then we also need to go beyond just talking about, hey, there is a problem.
Yeah.
At the moment, we see in the landscape, we see a lot of people providing solutions, and this is great. There's coaches, there's people providing support mechanisms, mindfulness apps, wonderful, wonderful businesses who are looking to help whilst making money. Perfect. But nobody's looking to actually address the causes of all of this. In a world where we've got this glorification of a Silicon Valley model that comes with a lot of kind of work hard, party hard, making lots of money, all these little attributes, which are ridiculous, because reality is, and everybody knows, is the majority of startups will fail anyway, right? But there is this glorified image that is fueled by a variety of different players. And yeah, I want to be part of something that actually says, you know what, this image is wrong. Don't be blinded by that. But also the people who create that shiny light, don't do that. Stop doing that. Own it, take the responsibility. And there's people like VCs. I mean, you talk to every founder who's in a venture-backed business will tell you the moment they received external investment from a venture capital company, that's where the real stress is started. And you go,
yeah,
does it have to be like that? And do you actually have to raise money from a VC? So there is that. And you talk to VCs and you tell them, guys, how do you feel about the situation? How do you feel about the landscape and the emotional challenges that your investment companies are experiencing? And they go, some of them will go, you know what, it's just part of the game, we don't care. Or even to be an entrepreneur, you have to be fundamentally flawed. You have to be a particular personality, so it's part and parcel of the game. Or you have someone maybe a little bit more enlightened and say, you know what, I think we should be doing something, but it never goes beyond that statement. It never goes to put your money where your mouth is and actually do something about it.
right.
So calling out the VCs and their responsibility, talking to the media who clearly are the ones who paint this picture, right? It's always a success stories. It's always about how much money they've raised. It's never about impact. It's never about how somebody benefited from an amazing solution, because it has to sound flashy. And of course it needs to sound. I realize I talk a lot. I don't even give you the chance to ask a question. We just push the button.
No, this is I mean, this is the whole point of a conversation, right? Like, it's, but this kind of leads into my next question, which I was going to ask anyway, which you're answering, is, you know, going on that train of thought of finger pointing and holding people responsible. You've mentioned VCs and you've mentioned media, but are there other parties in here as well? Like, you know, should there be a reasoning for health organizations, governments? Is there a need for them to be getting involved here? Where do you see the change needs to come from?
I think that it's a variety of different things. Some of it is just acknowledging that there's multiple people contributing to this, multiple parties. Some of it is everybody who is in that space. Ultimately, when we talk about raising awareness, it's not just about, hey, as an entrepreneur, you might encounter certain kind of challenges, and here's some ways to deal with it. It's also about going, you know what, if you're thinking of building a business, just be mindful that these things can happen. Because if you go into this completely blindly, you're more likely to actually kind of fall at the first hurdle. But if we come into it somewhat prepared, some entrepreneurial finishing school, then you might actually just have a different way of dealing with this. You might go into this with being more resilient, and of course, some of it sounds very theoretical, and a lot of people will tell you if you haven't been through it, you will not understand what's going to happen. But there is a space for governments. There is a space for support organizations like accelerators and incubators. There is a space for people from the investment space. I think part of it is also for everybody to have some introspection and actually recognizing, what do I contribute and how can I help? But at some point, it's also just about saying, you know what, this is not, there are triggers, there are things that are causing this. So don't blame it on some generic societal or kind of environment dynamic. It's real people doing this.
Right, it's all cause and effect, right?
Yes, and it's frustrating when nobody assumes responsibility.
So, who needs to assume responsibility first? Who's going to be the catalyst?
Hopefully we will be the catalyst, because we want to bring people at the table and we'll get them to talk about stuff. And it always takes the first one to say, you know what, we actually have part in this. I think VCs are an important piece. An element of advocacy and an element of activism on our side is necessary. And you see VCs who now start building their funds in a different way. Patient capital, in inverted commas, where the returns are not expected in the same time frames as a traditional VC would. There are people who understand or look at their portfolio companies in a much more caring way than just the expectation on high returns. So I think there's absolutely a conversation there. But ultimately, there is this whole, if there was a headline about this, it would be, there has to be a different way. And it's ultimately also us finding what that different way would be. We haven't got the answers yet. We want to sit down with the people and actually figuring out that different way, because otherwise, with that huge kind of surge of entrepreneurship in the last 10 years, we will have more and more people just crashing and burning. And the kind of the manifestations of this are so varied and so intense in many ways, right? So from substance abuse to suicidal thoughts to depression, anxiety, and all these things, right? And you can't just try and fix it. You need to do something to start preventing things as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Nektarios, we are probably coming to the end of our little allocated time for our chat. Thank you though. I think that's really insightful. It's like brilliant to hear from the journey to date that's brought you here. And I mean, we've already seen the Future Farm as a catalyst in the market already over the summer, of course, with the podcast and the conversations that have really kind of started being fueled off the back of that. So staying tuned and excited to see what's happening next.
Thank you, Zara.